This education session will be geared towards teachers, especially elementary school teachers, to help them get different strategies and things they can consider when they have a child with any sort of disability in their classroom. These strategies can be applied to help make the school environment more inclusive for these children with disabilities, to ensure that they can have the same school experience as every other student. In addition, research shows that the more students with disabilities can be exposed to the same experiences as other children, the more improvements can be seen. I'm Keenan Little.
And I'm Mackenzie Thacker. We are both third-year physical therapy students who became interested in this topic through working hands-on with the pediatric population and seeing different barriers they may face in the school environment. We chose to create this course so that we could not only challenge ourselves, but also you to truly think through the common things these students may face and work to find different ways we can find solutions to these barriers. Feel free to read more about what qualifications and experiences we have.
Our goal is by the end of this course, you're able to better identify potential barriers that students may face in the school environment and use the strategies discussed to make your school environment more accessible and inclusive for every type of learner. We also want you to feel more confident when going into a situation with a student with a disability, that you'll be able to assist them in the appropriate ways and make the environment a more comfortable place for them to be every day. Another goal is to make sure you have awareness of the options of physical therapy that are provided through the school system, or how physical therapy in general may be beneficial for these students with disabilities.
Throughout this presentation, we will discuss commonly seen topics: the classroom environment, hallway navigation, bathroom negotiation, playground accessibility, and physical therapy services in schools. We will break down each of these topics in depth for you.
Module 1. In this module, we're going to discuss commonly seen topics that may be encountered in the school environment that may need some additional attention in order to ensure the child can have the same learning experience and outcomes as other children in their class.
These are some of the elements that we have commonly seen in our experience with pediatric patients that may impact their ability to participate in the school environment. This table breaks down the topic and things to keep in mind when dealing with it. Wheelchairs can be required for various different reasons, but we need to understand the qualities of the student and the chair itself to understand what is needed from us to ensure that the student is successful. For example, is the chair manual or power operated? What are the dimensions of the chair, and can the student access the areas that they need to go? Does the chair have any added functions that can be used throughout the school day? And what are the safety mechanisms of the chair, such as if it has brakes or not? In terms of walkers, these can look very different based on the student's diagnosis. Is the walker standard or reverse? And similar to the wheelchair, what are the dimensions of the walker and the safety elements that it includes? Lofstrand crutches can also be seen, and it is important to know if the student requires one or two, how reliant they are on the crutch, and where is a safe place to store the crutch that it can easily be accessible to the student. Diminished upper extremity function is also something to consider. These students may have added difficulty when performing daily tasks that are required in school, such as writing and eating, and may need compensations made for that. Adaptive equipment is available and can make things like writing, eating, walking, and talking much easier for students with disabilities. Finally, there are certain diagnoses that can affect the child's sensory system that may require certain things to ensure that they do not overstimulate, or they may even need added sensation. We are going to break down each of these further in the following slides.
Here are the two types of wheelchairs you will most likely see in school. The first is a manual wheelchair, which the children will use their arms to propel themselves in order to move around the classroom. If they have to go down a long hallway or out to the playground for recess, they may need assistance from a teacher if it's a long distance. The nice thing about a manual wheelchair is that it normally collapses, and if they don't need to use it at all times, it can be easily stored and not take up too much space. The next kind of wheelchair you may see is a power wheelchair. For this type of chair, the child will use a joystick on the armrest to propel themselves. These are typically seen more with children who have a more involved diagnosis like cerebral palsy or spina bifida. These children will usually be able to maneuver around their environment without any additional assistance, as long as the setup of the classroom can accommodate their wheelchair. which we'll get into this more later in the presentation.
A common piece of equipment that is seen with children with disabilities is a reverse walker. This equipment is used by the child will be facing this way, and then they have these little handles here. We just wanted to show that this is different than a typical walker that most people think of, where they has the bar in the front and they use this way. This is the reverse of that. Another thing to notice is it does have a very wide base that makes it very difficult to navigate smaller spaces. So if you have a child with a physical disability that requires a reverse walker, you need to make sure that your classroom has a nice spread out layout so that they can still navigate to the different areas of the class where they may need to go. As mentioned earlier, lofster and crutches are a type of crutch that has a handle for the person to grab, but also forearm support. Some of these children might have a manual wheelchair for farther distances, but are able to use the crutches to get around the classroom. These can be seen in the pictures on the far left. The picture in the top middle is an AFO. This stands for ankle foot orthosis. These can provide some assistance to help them clear their feet when they are taking steps and help to avoid any trips or falls. The last two pictures on the right are examples of adaptive silverware and pencils that you might see to assist individuals that may have limited upper extremity function.
Sensory processing dysfunction occurs when the child cannot regulate how they react to different stimuli. These children are often diagnosed with pathologies such as autism and ADHD. The presentation of children with sensory processing impairments usually is noticed when the child does not react to certain situations the same way that other children do their age. This reaction can look like a straight sensory reaction or can affect the child's motor or behavioral patterns as well. These can present differently based on the individual, so make sure to consult with the child's caregiver on how to best manage their sensory processing disorders. These symptoms can differ in that they're either more oversensitive or sensory avoiding, or if they are undersensitive or sensory seeking. Sensory avoiding can look like tactile irritation, lights being too bright, being sensitive to loud noises, and having behavioral problems. Sensory seekers can present like they are unable to sit still, have trouble with social cues that they should be able to pick up on, seeking increased visual stimulation, and trouble sleeping.
So another thing to consider is not all disabilities seen in children are physical. For example, a lot of children have autism, which affects their sensory system, one of those things being vision. So one thing this facility has done is added these covers over their lights. This helps lessen the intensity of the lights so the child doesn't get overstimulated in their day-to-day work at school. Module 2, the classroom environment. This module will focus on the classroom and different elements that can be manipulated to ensure that all students feel included and valued in this particular environment.
When analyzing your classroom space, there are elements that should be looked at to see if they need to be addressed in order to make a more inclusive environment for children with disabilities. We will look at each of these in depth in the following slides.
The desk or table is a key element to look at when analyzing your classroom, as the children are likely to spend a lot of time at their desk. The first thing to ask yourself is what the desks in your classroom look like. Are they connected to the chair or separate? If they are connected, it may make it harder to perform transfers in and out of the chair for children with disabilities. You may need to see if another desk can be brought in for the student. The next thing to look at is if the child is in a wheelchair, looking to see if the chair will be able to pull up to and fit under the table so that the child can reach the table. Another thing to consider is if the child needs to sit in a certain area of the room to better succeed. For example, if the child has any visual or hearing impairments, then making sure they are towards the front of the class will be very helpful. Going off of that, it is also important to try to find an area where a device, such as a walker or wheelchair, could be stored that is out of the way, but is also accessible to the individual. Also, some students are more likely to develop injuries called pressure injuries that occur from staying in the same position for extended periods of time. If the child is at an increased risk for developing these types of injuries, then there may be a special cushion that they have to sit on throughout the day to prevent these from occurring. A common mistake that is typically seen in the classroom setting is that tables remain full at all times, which makes it really difficult for students that are in wheelchairs or have other physical disabilities to be able to reach the table to interact with their fellow peers. A way to combat this mistake is removing any unnecessary objects from the student with disabilities area so that they can easily access their space at the table at all times.
The classroom layout can also be a barrier for students with disabilities. It is important for a child with equipment, such as a wheelchair or walker, to be able to move around through the classroom, which may require furniture and other items in the room to be more spread out. The student should be able to easily reach their desk, the door, and the area that you as the teacher often occupy. The dimensions of the equipment should be gathered to ensure that the layout can accommodate that equipment and its ability to fit on the paths to get around the room. In addition, you should also try your best to ensure that there are minimal tripping hazards on the floor, such as fluffy rugs and toys in the main mobility pathways of the room.
So another thing to consider in your classroom setup is having environments that are kind of open so children with equipment can access the tables and everything to play with. To contrast this area is kind of closed off, and this area would be hard for someone with disability to maneuver. So just another thing to keep in mind in your classroom.
When a student has physical disabilities, how they move from one position to another or from one surface to another is called a transfer. This is something that you would need to inquire about to ensure that these can happen safely when under your supervision. In elementary school, it is common for students to get on the floor. It would be good to ask if this child is able to get on the floor by themselves, if they are even safe to get on the floor, or if they need assistance to perform this transfer. It is also important to look at the transfer process into and out of a desk, as this is something the child will likely do multiple times a day. This process will look differently based on the pathology that they possess. I would consult with the caregiver on how to handle transfers as a whole.
So when it comes to rugs in classrooms, we're going to show you two different types that both have pros and cons and both are commonly seen in classrooms. So the first type is this rug that's short. This is better for children to push their equipment across, but when it comes to transfers down to the floor and sitting on the floor, it does provide less cushion than the alternative over here, which is a little longer and fuzzier, which is a lot harder to push a wheelchair or a walker across, but it does provide more cushion when they're sitting on the ground.
One area that is not commonly thought about when it comes to these students is their access to supplies. Although these students may have impairments that restrict their ability to reach overhead, reach outside of their base of support, pick stuff up off the floor, and even grasp items, it is still important to ensure that they can access all of the same supplies as everyone else. It's crucial to promote as much independence with these students as possible. One thing you can do is to consider what you have planned that day and set it up in a way that all students can easily access the supplies.
One modification you can make in your classroom is if you're doing an activity where you're having your students write on a whiteboard, but you only have a standard whiteboard available, so it's a little high, you could always go to options like these two whiteboards here that can be brought down to that student's level so that they can still participate in class with their peers, but have the modifications they need to do it successfully.
So a good strategy for cubbies, if you have a child with disability in your class, would be to place their cubby on the end so that they can easily access it with a wheelchair or a walker. And be sure to not put anything too high, put it at a level where they can reach it. And also, if they're on the end, they could store their equipment with the rest of their stuff, so it's all in one place.
Module 3, Hallway Navigation. This module will look at strategies for hallway navigation to ensure the student is able to keep up with classmates and move in a way that works best for them.
Navigating the hallway may be another difficult area for children with disabilities. If a child has physical impairments or equipment, this can slow down their speed in the hallway. These children can already feel isolated or different from typical developing children, so having them fall behind in line can further exacerbate these feelings. Another obstacle for hallway navigation is space. If a child has a wheelchair or other piece of equipment, they may not be able to fit through the hallway with people next to them, and may need someone else to hold the rest of their stuff, like a backpack or a jacket.
So another thing to consider in the typical school day that you might encounter with a child with physical disabilities is hallway negotiation. And a strategy you can use with that is a lot of times these kids may be a little slower than the other children. So one thing you can do is make sure that they are always towards the front of the line when you're transitioning from one place to another in the school, to help make sure that they set the pace for the class itself and so that they don't get behind during these transitions.
One strategy for speed, as mentioned in the video, is to make the child with disabilities the line leader in the hallway so that they can set the pace for the rest of the class. In terms of space, it is important to understand the size of the equipment in order to determine the space needed to properly navigate the hallway. From there, you can also educate the rest of the class to not get too close to the equipment, as this can decrease the mobility of the student with disabilities and also put everyone's safety at risk. Finally, you may need to consult with the student on how they typically carry things when using their equipment. You may need to attach a basket or a bag to the equipment in order to transfer the individual's belongings, or you can always assign a bag buddy to the student who helps transport their belongings for them.
Module 4, Bathroom Negotiation. This module will focus on what is necessary for children with physical disabilities to successfully use the restroom at school.
When it comes to taking a child with a disability to the bathroom, it is important for you to know how much assistance they need. This information can come from a conversation with the child's parent or caregiver, or with the student themselves if they are able to communicate it with you. Some children may be able to go to the bathroom all by themselves, but others may need help transferring to and from the toilet. Another thing that is important is to ensure that the bathroom they are going to is accessible to them. Hopefully, the bathroom in your school will have a handicap stall, which will allow for extra room for their assistive equipment and give you enough space to assist them with transferring to the toilet if necessary.
So when it comes to taking a child to the restroom when they have a physical disability where they require equipment such as a wheelchair or a walker, some things to keep in mind are that the standard stall size typically do not have enough room either to get the chair in or to maneuver inside the stall to complete the transfer to the toilet. So that is where the handicap stall is going to be necessary for these students. So that gives them enough room to get in the stall, maneuver their chair however they need so that they can transfer directly to the toilet. So it's really important to make sure that the other students are aware that this stall needs to be open for these students pretty much at all times so that they have the same access that the other students have.
So another option for taking a child with disabilities to the bathroom, if your school has it, an individual bathroom. So this has more area if they need assistance using the restroom. The caregiver or teacher or whoever's helping them has more room to help them in here. And if there's a time when multiple kids are going to the bathroom at the same time, it might just be less distractions and just easier for everyone involved if they go to this bathroom instead.
Module 5, Playground Accessibility. This module will discuss the process of making your playground more accessible for children with disabilities and different activities that can be done at recess to include all children.
The first step towards making your school's playground more accessible is doing a quick assessment of your current playground. A few questions you can ask yourself to get started is, can a child in a wheelchair interact with any of the play structures? Are there paths throughout the playground so that the child can access different areas? And are there planned activities that can include all children, including those with disabilities?
So another thing to consider when looking at the playground at your school, a lot of playgrounds have different textures on the ground that are supposed to help protect children, but things like mulch and sand can actually be very hard to navigate for children that have wheelchairs and walkers. So one thing that this facility has done is added this path to the play structure that makes it easier for children to access it. However, if you do not have the means to do this at your school, there are other modifications you can make, such as just laying a rug down that can also help them roll. If that still doesn't work, you can also just encourage the other students to pick games that will also include these kids, such as like Simon Says, tag, ball toss, things that they can do that don't involve climbing the structures on the playground itself.
So another thing this facility did really well on their playground is they made sure to include flat paths that access different play structures in different areas of the playground. so that these children with physical disabilities aren't confined to just one corner of the playground. They can access any area they would like to go to.
When it comes to modifying the playground, something as simple as putting in a ramp where there are a few steps can make a big difference in how they can participate in activities during recess. Social interaction is important for children with disabilities to be able to participate in with their peers. Some games that all children can play are hand clap games such as Miss Mary Mac, Patty Cake, etc. Red light, green light on a flat surface that a child in a wheelchair can either propel themselves or use their power wheelchair to move forward and stop. And games such as Simon Says. Some disabilities like autism spectrum disorder have sensory components, so adding something like playground chimes so that children can explore the different sounds they make, or a sandbox would provide tactile stimulation.
So when it comes to a playground, a really good thing to include for children who have disabilities that affect their sensory system, like autism, is a sandbox, because this can feel really good for them to play with it on their tactile sensation. So that would definitely be something to include on your playground if you can.
The photos on this slide are examples of different ways to modify a playground to make it more inclusive. The top right photo is a whole accessible play structure, which is amazing, but can be a little pricey. If you don't think your school has the funds for something like this, you have several options. First, there are smaller standalone additions that are more affordable that you can add to your existing playground, such as a xylophone and the other instrument in the picture that is next to it. The other option is to hold a fundraiser at your school to raise money to purchase a piece of equipment. There have been success stories on social media where a class had a child in a wheelchair and the other children wanted him to be able to play with them at recess. So they all decided to raise the money it would take to make the necessary playground modifications. The last option you have is to apply for an inclusive playground grant. The website at the bottom of the slide is a playground grant resource guide that you can go to if you want more information about the different options available.
Module 6, Physical Therapy Services. This module will discuss the PT options for children in school and how you as a teacher can refer a child to get the appropriate treatment.
The Individuals with Disabilities Act Part B was put into place to ensure that children with disabilities have access to services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. Referrals can be made by school personnel or a parent or guardian. So if you see a child struggling with mobility in the classroom, even if it is set up well, or if they are struggling with other tasks during the day that compromise their safety, their difficulty with sensory processing, or fine motor skills, you can reach out to either the school's designated PT, and if your school doesn't have a designated PT, you can reach out to the district assigned PT. If you do not know who the assigned PT for your school is, you can talk to your principal or guidance counselor to see if they may know who to contact. The great thing about this is that they provide the PT service in the actual school setting so that they work on exactly what the child is having difficulty with in the specific environment that they are struggling in, which can help make it more salient and effective. I know we've been talking about physical therapy this entire presentation, but most of these techniques can also translate to occupational therapy services as well.
Now it's time to see what you've learned. We're going to do a quick 5-question quiz to test your knowledge.
Question 1. What is not a good strategy to ensure the student with disabilities can access their belongings? A. Avoid the top shelf of their cubbies. B. Place their cubby on the end of the row. C. Store their equipment close to their desk. Or D. Place their cubby in the middle of the row so they feel included.
The correct answer is D. Place their cubbies in the middle of the row so they feel included. This is not the best option for accessing their belongings, as this can lead to having to navigate around other students, and they may not be able to reach into their cubby as well if they cannot pull up beside it.
Question 2. Which of the following is a good strategy to ensure the student has appropriate access to the restroom at school? A. Ensuring the handicap stall is open for the student to use. B. Allowing the student to use a standalone restroom when available. C. making sure the student has the appropriate assistance that they may need, or D, all of the above?
The correct answer is D, all of the above. All of these strategies are appropriate ways to handle taking a student with disabilities to the restroom to set them up for success.
Question 3. What would be the best option to include in your playground to stimulate a student with a sensory processing disorder? A. Ramps on play structures for access. B. A sandbox. C. Mulch under the play structure. Or D. Flat pathways throughout the playground area.
The correct answer is B, a sandbox. A sandbox can provide great tactile feedback to these individuals and help stimulate the sensation of touch.
Question 4. Which of the following would be a good element to include in the classroom layout? A. Clear pathways to the main areas of the room and to the door. B. Desks or tables that are close in proximity to one another. C. Fluffy rugs throughout the room. Or D. Placing the student in the back corner of the room.
The correct answer is A, clear pathways to the main areas of the room and to the door. This ensures that the student can access all areas they need to get to in their classroom, as well as the door in case of an emergency.
Question 5. Which of the following school activities should not be affected by a diminished upper extremity function? A. Writing their name on their worksheets. B. Eating lunch with their classmates. C. Walking in the hallway to recess. Or D. Their ability to grip small toys.
The correct answer is C, walking in the hallway to recess. All of the other options involve using your arms or hands in some capacity, whereas walking does not typically require assistance from the upper extremity unless the student uses an assistive device.
We hope you will now feel more comfortable with having children with disabilities in your classrooms on a daily basis. Our references are listed below, and if you have any further questions, we have provided our email addresses at the bottom of this slide for you. Thank you so much for taking part in this course.